Hello, and welcome back to the Generating Conversations podcast, where we bridge the gap between Gen X and Gen Z. I'm Steph.
And I am Megan, and today we are going to explore the topic of childhood experiences with risky play and how this is important for child development. So, what is risky play?
Yeah, good question. I think one thing we can refer to is systematic review that Brusoni and colleagues did looking at risky play and its effect on child health. So their definition of risky play was thrilling and exciting play that can include the possibility of injury. And they have 6 different categories that they put that into. So we've got great heights. So there's fear of falling here, and great speeds. So that would be risk of collisions. Dangerous tools, that would include things like ropes or saws. Dangerous elements such as cliffs or fire pits. Rough and tumble play, and then disappearing or getting lost. And they also have a definition that they hold for health, because there are a number of different dimensions that they consider here based off of the World Health Organization's definition of child health. And that includes physical activity behaviors, injuries, motor skill development, and social, mental, and spiritual health. So it covers a lot of different realms.
Okay, thank you so much for clarifying that. So, I just want to take a moment to talk about, first of all, why we are talking about this and what benefits there are that are associated with risky play. So I just want to kind of put this into context. We take risk every single day, whether it's getting out of bed or taking the bus to school. We are constantly exposed to risk, but a lot of time people have trouble balancing the risk and reward aspects. So there is a really key psychology piece to this, where Sandsetter et al. Talked about the benefits to risky play. So they described it as a practice arena for emotional regulation. So when we're being put into uncomfortable environments, we have to learn how to navigate them, and those in turn help with emotional regulation. It also teaches about seeking thrill and challenge, and it kind of gives children that drive to look for that sense of adventure.
Well, I think we all know people who, no matter what, they're going to find danger because they're going to look for it.
Exactly.
They almost, thrive on
yes, and
feeling.
This is why it's so important to learn about risk and why it's important. We can also look at this from a self-determination theory standpoint, where it impacts our autonomy and competence, or that impacts the way that we approach a risk. So when people feel that they have control or autonomy over their decisions with how they approach a risk, it will also, when they engage in this risk, it will improve their competence at navigating tricky situations. So such as playing on the monkey bars. You're going to be less scared to do something like that as an adult, as if you were involved in that as a kid. So these pieces, they in turn help with intrinsic motivation in fostering a love of learning and exploration. So when you're involved in all these risky behaviors as a kid, or not behaviors, but risky activities as a kid, you will eventually be more comfortable with it as an adult.
Right, because those skills don't just come out of
so
nowhere. It's something that we have to develop through our own experiences and exposures.
For sure, yeah. So it's a evolutionary drive is what you could call it. We also see that risk has many positive aspects, which are, a lot of people look at risk and think, oh no, and take a negative approach to it. But we need to remember that there are a lot of positives. So even just, for example, in the context of sport, we can see risk as exciting and fun in sport. I'm sure that you have examples as well. I do as an athlete, of course.
Yeah, and running around and playing and...
Exactly.
Yeah, it's exciting.
So it really helps develop a sense of adventure, as well as learning to become adaptable. So a tolerance for discomfort is how one may say it. It puts you into situations where you need to put your problem solving skills into work, I guess. It also, when we're involved in risky play, it also helps us know what we're capable of, right? And that comes back to the competence part of the self-determination theory. So when you know what you're capable of, first of all, you're developing your physical literacy skills as well as proprioception, knowing how to navigate maybe difficult environments just based off of visual cues and knowing how your body moves and all that good stuff. But so today we actually see a decreasing.
Yeah, it certainly seems like there is a difference in a cultural shift. And I think there are a number of different reasons for that. One of them could even be liability. So we see the idea of the playgrounds that I see in Vancouver, so many of them look the same. And there's a situation that I had when one of my children was in school and the school board told us they were going to remove the playground and we would be responsible for designing it and organizing it as well as fundraising to pay for it because they felt that the playground that existed was no longer safe enough. And we saw that as an opportunity to create a more interesting, engaging, nature-based play environment. And we went through a whole process of designing and giving some options to the kids to vote on. And when we heard back from the school, they rejected all of our proposals and basically gave us a catalog we could choose from. So I think what they're trying to do is limit liability by standardizing things and also trying to manage upkeep costs. But this doesn't even result in better safety for children. There is some research that falls on the rubber mats are actually more likely to cause injury than, for example, a wood chip playground. So I think we're not always keeping the kids' best interest in mind when we are trying to manage some of these safety issues.
Yeah, for sure. I think I would also rather fall into some wood chips than a hard rubber mat. I think another big piece of why this is decreasing or why risky play is decreasing is actually the increase in phone use and screen time and video games and all of that. There was actually this study in 2015 that surveyed UK children's daily time use and how they allocated their time to different activities. And it was actually found that since the mid-70s, screen-based and supervised activities increased by 30%, while outdoor play and unsupervised activities decreased by 30%. So I feel like I have seen this personally, even in the way that me and my little sister have grown up. I grew up in the 2000s, sort of a time before phones, and a lot of my memories were playing outside, just being outside from the time I got home from school until it was time to go to bed. Playing games on the trampoline, climbing trees, roaming around the neighborhood on bikes with my friends. And to do this, I would often have to go walk up to my neighbor's house and knock on her door and be like, hey, can McKenna come out to play?
Well, that's interesting because it sounds a lot like the stereotypical 80s childhood, which is when I was growing up.
Yeah. So, but like today, with the increase in phone use and social media and that, even just in my sister, she's 13 years old now. And when she connects with her friends, she'll often put her headset on, hop on the PlayStation and play like games like Fortnite with them, which is still, I mean, I'm sure that there's still a lot of positive aspects to that. And it's more accessible to socialize, but it takes away the physical activity aspect of it.
Yeah, it's certainly a way I see my children connecting a lot with their friends too.
Definitely. Another thing that I have noticed personally, as well as a lot of the available research, is overprotective parenting trends. So I think we had talked about helicopter parenting in one of our kin classes. And even just with the helicopter parenting, that's just parents hovering over their kids' every move. And one, I guess, prime example of this is even just having your kid's location on your phone at all times and really dictating what activities they're going into, how they're spending that free time, which ends up having kids in a lot of structured free time. So as said before, structured free time is increasing while unstructured free time is very much decreasing. So in that article that we had talked about in class by Kern and Hill in 2022, they actually found that parents are spending, on average, 3 hours more with their kids than they were 50 years ago. So this is a little bit concerning because it limits the opportunities for kids to be involved in risky play opportunities.
And I think you've got some good information too about like the space, the ranges that kids have used for play.
I took a kin class in my undergrad at the University of Saskatchewan, and I remember this study that we talked about, and I was doing some looking around, and I found it in the Move Free report by the UK in 2024, and it talked about how, the area that kids are allowed to explore decreases with each generation. So in particular, it looked at this one family in Sheffield in the UK, and in 1919, their great-grandfather, and this is all at the age of 8, the great-grandfather was able to walk up to about 10 kilometers from his home to go fishing. And in 1950, the grandfather at age 8 was allowed to only go about like 2-ish kilometers to go visit the woods, whatnot. In 1979, the mom at age 8, she was allowed to ride a bike around the neighborhood, but only had about 1 kilometer radius to do this. And so the kid, born in 2000 or 2007, I guess, at age 8, he was only able to go about 300 yards from his home. So walking up and down the street, he was driven to school supervised and had very limited unsupervised roaming. Is this something that you would agree with?
Yeah, I mean, even if I reflect on what my dad told me about his childhood and thinking about my own, and then also my experience with my children, I can see that playing out because my dad talks about how his mom would just kick him out of the house early in the morning and he'd be gone playing in the forest by himself all day and coming home at dark. And so that's his how things were when he was growing up, and he very much normalizes that and almost takes it as a badge of honor. And I always went to schools that were outside of my catchment, so I had to take the bus everywhere to different neighborhoods. And now my kids, like when they were smaller in the schoolyard with other parents, people being sort of, when are we allowed to let them walk home by themselves?
Yeah, so actually an interesting point here, within this same paper, I guess, or the same journal, there was another study by Sean et al. In 2013, and they looked at percentage of parents that allowed their children to walk home from school. And this is in elementary school. So in the 70s, they found that 85% of parents let their kids walk home from school. And in the 2010s, only, I think that, 25% of kids only were allowed to walk home from school. So we went from 85 to 25 in a span of 40 years.
Wow, that is significant.
Yeah.
So I think part of this is because parents are fearful of worst case scenarios.
Definitely.
Right? And I think one main example of that would be kidnapping. You know, nobody wants that to happen, but if we see it in the media, it's as if it becomes a thing that could happen to us, right? Even though the risks might be incredibly small. Nobody wants to be the one case of that happening. There's also fears of being hit by cars. I know that I've definitely allowed my children to do different things based on whether we lived on a busy street or a quieter street. I think that's natural. And there are a lot of child deaths because of car accidents. So usually that's because they're in the car. But I think a lot of inroads have been made with that, just with the mandating seatbelts, right, has
Yeah.
probably made a big difference in that. But I do even see that you can also get hit as a pedestrian in a crosswalk, right? So even though there's places that are meant to be safe, we can't always manage all of the risks that are involved. As you're saying, every choice we make, we're taking some element of risk.
For sure.
There's also the issue of parental judgment, which I brought up with, parents wondering when is it going to be okay for us to, everybody's worried about what everybody else is going to think on the playground. And I think there's also a place for that being seen as a cultural or a values thing. And when I had my kids at playgrounds, I would sometimes hear parents admonish their kids for being creative with the slide. It's like, the slide is for going down only. And I'm really personally adverse to that much control on kids. So when I would hear parents saying things like that you could be pretty sure I would be the one crawling up the slide with my kids and trying to model alternative uses.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I really don't like the idea of the kids feeling that controlled.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, everything that we just said, all these things that are decreasing kids' involvement in risky play. So I guess the next question is, so what can we do about this, right?
Yeah.
And I would say that understanding the difference between actual risk and actual danger is key. So when I was doing some research for this, I stumbled across this video of a TED Talk by Heather Von Bank. She's a professor at the University of Missouri, and she did a study with her undergrad students where they posed the question to a bunch of parents that was, what comes to mind when you hear the word risk? So then what they did with this information was they created a word cloud. So the words that had the most responses showed up bigger in this flood of words, I guess. And one of the things that they noticed in this study was almost every word that came up was a very negative conception of risk. So some of the keywords that were found were danger, injury, scary, harm, mistake. Jumping was one. I'm thinking maybe trampolines or jumping off high surfaces.
Right.
But anyway, so a lot of these words were very negative, and this kind of comes back to the three big fears that parents have, which really anxieties are just really heightened when it comes to parenting and injury and risk. And parents often find themselves overestimating risk and not knowing how to distinguish between actual risk and actual danger.
Yeah, and I think the kids pick up on that anxiety, right? And they
for sure.
internalize that for themselves. It's sort of like they're getting a message of, you can't handle this.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas it could be approached as skills that need to be learned. It's interesting, one of the papers that I looked at by Bauer and colleagues from 2025, so very recent, they explored the perceptions of parents who are also emergency care practitioners. So one thing you could expect to happen there is that they see the worst of the worst. Maybe they're especially wanting to control and create a safe environment for their kids because they can see what the worst case scenarios would really be. But what they did find was that most of these parents seemed to really distinguish between when they could let their kids explore a potentially risky environment and when they needed to intervene. So they knew what sort of injuries would land a kid in an emergency department. So they were arguably better at distinguishing what situations presented real danger of injury or pain.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I guess a key takeaway from even just that study in itself is, and the word cloud, is that we really need to focus on changing our own perceptions as risks, especially if you're a parent. So we need to keep in mind, it is not our job to protect but it really is our job to help develop life skills and how to teach kids how to navigate challenges and problem-solving skills. So we need to become more open-minded into what is risk actually. And again, in the TED Talk by Dr. Heather Von Bank, she had this quote that I really liked that was, "Be safe as necessary, not safe as possible."
Yeah, that's a really great perspective. I think that also looking at how we have messaging to our kids, right? So the words that we use, we may be better at seeing where some risky situations might happen, but just saying be careful isn't going to give them any information about what they should do or what they should be noticing.
Yes.
So thinking about providing them with some cues to pick up on, or what they might want to do to manage what's going on in their environment, such as watch where you're putting your foot, right? So helping them develop the skills to navigate risk, which if we can't protect them from everything, that is a delusion that we might have as parents, that if we control enough things, we can stop bad things from happening to our kids. Unfortunately, we don't have that full control, but we can teach them, help them learn more and more of the skills that will help them navigate risk throughout their lives.
Exactly. Guidance, not control.
Right.
All right. And so that is all that we actually have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in to listen. On our next episode, we will actually be doing a critical analysis of Dr. Mark Beauchamp's PhD dissertation.
That'll be lots of fun. Make sure you join us.
Yeah. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.